Before we start, this really isn't a conversation about atheist call-in shows. It's a conversation about what we expect to learn from them. But this is the question we have to start with in order to better contextualize the point. Now, I promise by the end of this conversation, you'll have a greater appreciation for the work that call-in shows do, while also knowing where to draw the line of expectation. The problem with atheist call-in shows is not that they exist. I actually enjoy them. They can be entertaining, they expose people to critical thinking, and they create opportunities for bad arguments to be challenged in public. My core concern is not really the callers are bad, it's that the format may unintentionally produce a distorted sample of Christianity. The issue is less about trolling itself and more about selection bias. The people most likely to call in are often not the most theologically informed, emotionally grounded, or representative believers. That creates a selection problem. So the audience may walk away feeling like they've engaged Christianity, when in reality, they may have engaged a subset of reactive, fringe, confused, or performative Christians, a random assortment of attention seeking rogues, poorly formed apologetics, and unserious theology. Let's unpack a few problems that come from this. The first one is selection bias. Selection bias means the people who show up are not a neutral or representative cross section of Christianity. The format itself filters for certain kinds of people. The average thoughtful Christian who is confident, informed, emotionally regulated, and not looking for spectacle is often far less likely to call an atheist show than someone who is impulsive, combative, underprepared, lonely, fringe, or just looking for attention. So the issue is not just that bad callers exist, the issue is that the format may naturally attract disproportionate numbers of bad representatives. That matters because if the audience keeps encountering the same kinds of callers, they may start to assume this is Christianity. But really, they're often seeing the subset of Christians most likely to enter a hostile or adversarial phone format. That's not the same thing as seeing the most influential, mainstream, or even psychologically functional expressions of the faith. The sample is skewed before the conversation even starts. The next one is representational distortion. This is what happens after selection bias does its work. If selection bias means the wrong samples are showing up, then representational distortion means the audience's picture of Christianity gets bent out of shape as a result. If most of the Christian secular audiences see are fringe callers with weak arguments, unstable delivery, or bizarre theological claims, then Christianity begins to appear as if it's mostly made up of those things. But that is misleading. Modern Christianity, whatever else we say about it, is also expressed through polished pastors, institutional doctrine, mainstream apologetics, family systems, political rhetoric, and emotionally compelling community structures. So if your engagement is mostly with callers who are wildly unprepared, then the image of Christianity in the secular mind can become distorted. You start fighting a version of the faith that many practicing Christians do not recognize as their own. If the people most visible in the format are not representative, then the critique may be accurate against them while still being inaccurate against Christianity as it actually functions in the real world. That's the deeper problem. Not just misrepresentation of doctrine, but misrepresentation of what Christianity looks like in lived social reality. The next one is low bar discourse. This is about the level of thought required to participate. A call in format often allows people to enter a high stakes discussion with almost no threshold of preparation, clarity, theological understanding, or argumentative skill. That creates a low bar. Anybody can call, anybody can make a claim, anybody can represent Christianity badly. And because the conversations happens live, the audience experiences that weak representation in real life. The problem is that low bar discourse can make a movement or worldview look easier to dismantle than it actually is. If you keep encountering Christians who cannot define the Trinity, cannot explain why they trust Scripture, cannot distinguish emotional conviction from evidence, and cannot articulate the strongest form of their worldview, then atheism can begin to feel like it's winning against Christianity in full. But maybe it's only winning against the least serious version of it. This doesn't mean those engagements are worthless. It means the level of discourse may be too low to generate real progress. In this context, low bar discourse means the format often allows weak ideas to stand in for major traditions. And that can create a false sense of victory, not because the critique is wrong, but because the target is often too easy. Which leads us to the problem of critique without contact with the strongest version of the belief. A critique is only as meaningful as the thing it has actually engaged. If you want to say Christianity is intellectually weak, morally incoherent, socially harmful, or psychologically manipulative, then ideally that critique should be tested against its strongest, most coherent, most sophisticated forms, not just as sloppy as representatives. Otherwise, you may be critiquing a weak version of Christianity while never really coming into contact with the best case its defenders can make. Now, this is related to Steelmanning. It's the difference between defeating bad apologetics and confronting the deepest structure of Christian belief. Some atheist call-in shows may produce lots of critique without much real contact with Christianity at its strongest social form. That means they may expose nonsense while still failing to grapple with the versions of Christianity that continue to persuade intelligent, educated, emotionally stable people. It's possible to be very good at defeating bad Christian arguments while still rarely engaging Christianity at its strongest. That's not an insult, it's a methodological concern. Now let's talk about how these ideas work together. Selection bias means the pool of callers is skewed. That produces representational distortion where Christianity appears more ridiculous or fringe than it often is in practice. The format encourages performative engagement where people play roles more than pursue truth. That lowers the quality into low bar discourse where weak representatives dominate. So you end up with critique without contact with the strongest version of the belief, which limits the depth of the analysis. And all of that creates a gap between entertainment value and diagnostic value. I'm not saying atheist call-in shows are bad. What I'm saying is that they may be good at exposure, good at critique, good at entertainment, but less reliable as a serious map of Christianity as it actually lives, functions, persuades, and survives. I'm not saying atheist call-in shows are not engaging the smartest Christians. I'm saying we may be overestimating how much Christianity is even sustained by argument in the first place. The big point is, call-in show audiences often operate as though Christianity stands or falls on whether believers can defend it intellectually under pressure. But functional Christianity usually does not live there. It's not primarily held together by apologetics, formal theology, or academic coherence. It's held together by lived experience, emotional meaning, ritual familiarity, identity, belonging, moral narrative, and social reinforcement. Let's hit this core distinction. Functional Christianity is Christianity as it's actually lived by ordinary people in real social settings, not Christianity as debated, not Christianity as academically systematized, not Christianity as philosophically defended, but Christianity as practiced, inhabited, felt, inherited, and socially performed. And in that form, a person doesn't need doctrinal coherence to remain committed. They don't need a defensible doctrine of hell, a philosophically consistent theory of prayer, a well developed account of evil, a historically informed understanding of scriptures, or even a rigorous case for the resurrection, because that's not what's doing the real work. What's doing the real work is more like, this is how I make sense of life. This is what got me through hard times. This is where my people are. This is what feels true right now. This is how I was raised. This is where I feel safe. This gives me meaning. This is a part of who I am. So theological incoherence is often irrelevant to functional Christianity because the faith is not operating as an intellectual system first. Now, what this means is that atheist call-in shows may be critiquing Christianity at the wrong layer. We often engage belief as though the decisive issue is whether the believer can logically defend propositions. But for many Christians, belief is not primarily functioning as a proposition set. It's functioning as a relational, emotional, social ecosystem. So when a caller gets cornered on bad logic, the audience may think Christianity has been meaningfully challenged. But in lived reality, that exchange may have touched almost nothing that actually sustains Christianity for most believers. And that's the problem. It's not merely that the callers are weak, not merely that the sample is skewed, but that the entire form of engagement may assume that intellectual contradiction is more important than it actually is in the maintenance of belief. Apologetics and academic theology are often treated as though they are central to Christianity, but in functional Christianity, they're usually peripheral. The average believer is not living inside of arguments. They're living inside experiences, identities, relationships, habits, symbols, and communities. In other words, functional Christianity doesn't need to be coherent to be compelling. But now let's talk about why apologetics don't actually have a real home in functional Christianity. Apologetics often exists at the edges of Christianity, not at its center. It's usually for defending the faith against outsiders, reassuring doubters, giving intellectual cover to prior commitments, and creating a perception of reasonableness. But it's not usually the engine of ordinary Christian life. Most believers are not waking up every day sustained by cosmological arguments, manuscript evidence, or Thomistic metaphysics. They're sustained by prayer habits, worship environments, family expectations, community rituals, personal testimony, moral language, and emotional interpretation of life events. In that sense, apologetics is often more like public relations for belief than the actual substance of everyday faith. And academic theology is even farther removed. It may matter within seminaries, clergy training, or specialist communities, but most Christians do not organize their lives around serious theological inquiry. In many churches, too much theology is often a liability if it threatens simplicity, certainty, or emotional cohesion. So the issue is not that functional Christians cannot defend their beliefs well. The issue is that they often don't even need to. If Christianity functions socially and emotionally, then incoherence does not necessarily weaken it. A belief can be philosophically inconsistent, historically uninformed, biblically contradictory, morally selective, and still remain socially powerful and personally meaningful. Why? Because people do not only remain in systems that make sense, they remain in systems that stabilize them, locate them, comfort them, connect them, dignify them, and organize their world. So exposing contradiction may have limited impact because contradiction is not the point of attachment. Atheist critique often assumes that if a belief fails rationally, it should weaken existentially. But that is not how functional Christianity usually works. This changes the problem with call in shows. Now the issue becomes even bigger. The problem is not only that viewers might imitate debate tactics with Christians in their lives, and that is a problem because debate should always be a consent based conversation. Trying to force others into debate is bad faith engagement. But the bigger problem is that those tactics may be built around a false theory of belief altogether. If the viewer thinks once I expose the contradiction, the belief should start collapsing, they may completely underestimate what they're up against because the Christian in their life may not care that much about contradiction at all. Because the role Christianity plays in their life is not primarily logical, it's experiential, it's affective, it's communal, it's infrastructural. So the atheist may be trying to win on the field of argument, while the Christian is actually standing on the field of meaning, memory, belonging, and emotional coherence. That mismatch is huge. Truth is not going to get you past that boundary. Only trust will. And as with anything, there are deeper implications here. This also means that many atheists may still be too propositional in how they imagine religion. They may believe religion survives because people think that it's true in a rigorous sense, but often religion survives because it feels true, functions usefully, and is socially embedded. So if the critique only attacks propositions, it may never reach the mechanisms that actually reproduce belief. The real durability of Christianity is not in its apologetics, but in its embeddedness. The result is that secular audiences can end up fighting a caricature of Christianity that many ordinary Christians do not even recognize. And when that happens, the critique may be satisfying as entertainment without being especially effective at provoking introspection among believers who actually inhabit more coherent or socially functional forms of Christianity that actually shapes families, churches, politics, and culture. Christianity as it exists in its serious, organized, and influential forms. That matters because the real danger is not merely fighting a straw man, it's failing to understand the versions of Christianity that actually hold power. That's one of the reasons I actually appreciate Brady Goodwin's approach to bringing on Christians he actually knows to debate. The value in that is not that these guests are guaranteed to be better apologists or more theologically sophisticated. The value is that they are more likely to represent recognizable, functional Christianity as it actually operates in people's lives. In that sense, the conversation becomes more socially meaningful, even if it's not more academically rigorous. And if the goal is to seriously engage Christianity rather than just expose bad arguments for entertainment, then that kind of exchange may be far more useful in giving non believers a better view of Christianity as it functions in society. Atheist call in shows are often good at exposing weak Christian arguments, but not always good at engaging the forms of Christianity that actually shapes people's lives and the culture. So, what this means then is not necessarily that atheist call in shows need to become something else. They don't. They don't need to stop being what they are. They don't need to abandon critique. They don't need to lose their edge or turn into sociology seminars on lived religion. The real takeaway is more modest, but also much more important. We need to be clear about what these shows are actually good at. Their greatest value is not that they give us a reliable picture of Christianity. They don't. And honestly, that's not what they exist for. The sample is too skewed, too reactive, too selective, and too shaped by the incentives of the format to function as a trustworthy map of functional Christian belief. What they give us instead is something else that is incredibly valuable. They give us lessons in epistemology. They show us how people reason, how they justify claims, how they move from feeling to certainty, how they confuse conviction with evidence, and how difficult it can be for many people to examine the foundations of what they believe in real time. They also give us a window into critical thinking itself, how to ask better questions, how to identify bad logic, how to slow down weak assumptions, and how to distinguish confidence from coherence. And just as importantly, they give us the experience of the host. We get to observe how seasoned skeptics navigate confusion, evasion, emotional volatility, bad arguments, and deeply ingrained habits of thought. That has immense value. There is something to learn there about patience, about framing, pressure, clarity, and even the limits of reasoning in live conversation. So the point here is not that atheist call-in shows are failing. The point is that we should stop expecting them to provide insight into Christianity as it functions in society. They are not a reliable mirror of Christianity as it is actually lived by many believers. They're a stage on which we can observe reasoning under pressure, critical engagement in motion, and the challenges of confronting belief in real time. If we remember that, then we can appreciate these shows for what they genuinely offer without mistaking them for a serious diagnostic tool for understanding Christianity itself. And maybe that is the real reminder. Atheist call-in shows teach us a great deal about how people think, how skeptics respond, and how arguments break down. But they tell us far less about Christianity than many viewers may assume. If we really want a fighting chance against the rising tide of religious nationalism ramping up across the globe, then we are going to have to become more strategic than reactionary. We have to learn how to use our tools appropriately. Support the hell out of our atheist call-in shows. They give skeptics everywhere a place to sharpen the tools of inquiry, critical thinking, and epistemic clarity. Volunteer with organizations that help people still navigating religious trauma. Give to the institutions willing to confront religious overreach in politics, and be sure to hold them accountable for delivering more than just token victories. But beyond all of that, we need to pay attention to Christianity as it actually functions in the real world, how it operates, how it spreads, how it organizes people, how it builds loyalty, and how it accumulates power. And we need to ask with honesty and seriousness, is this all we should be doing? Is this really all it takes? What else should we be building alongside critique? Because the moment we ask that question in good faith, we inherit a responsibility we can no longer ignore, and that's the responsibility to build the kinds of social infrastructure that create soft spaces to land and safe places to live for the people who are brave enough to make their way into a new world. Winning on all fronts will require more than being good at fighting. It will require us to become just as good at building. If they're building power through infrastructure, identity, and belonging, then our response cannot be critique alone. We have to build too. A fighting chance means more than exposing bad ideas. It means building better worlds. The future will not belong only to those who can fight well, but to those who can build what people can actually live in. What all of this should remind us is that if we want more than critique, if we want a real response to the forces shaping people's lives, we have to build something people can actually belong to. That's why BridgeCity exists. BridgeCity is about rebuilding the social infrastructure of belonging for a post-religious world, because the problem was never community. The problem was making belonging conditional. So if you're tired of a world where people have to choose between intellectual honesty and human connection, if you're looking for belonging without belief requirements, if you want more than reaction, more than deconstruction, more than just learning how to fight, then I want to invite you to join us at BridgeCity. This is a people-centric community for people who still want connection, growth, participation, and shared life without having to perform certainty on any lines. Come step into the global campus, move from spectator to builder, join a community that is not built around what people reject, but around what people can build together. Because the future of community will not be built on certainty. It will be built on participation. And if that sounds like the kind of world you want to help create, then come connect with BridgeCity and help us build what comes next. The QR code is on the screen and the link is in the description. Until next time, keep rising.